actually believe that gameplay-wise, at least, Sonic Forces is a game that stands for nothing. You can't adapt a lack of effort when deciding what direction to take your franchise in. You can be directionless, which Forces and Frontiers both are to varying degrees, but you're not going to produce consistent results by throwing the rulebook out the
Ah, Miss Proxy. Written ourselves into a corner, have we? You challenge the status quo of the fandom, and for what? To give fans a new perspective? To engage in an honest debate? I see. So the stagnating series isn't over just yet. Fine. Let's see how you salvage this next blunder. But sooner or later, you'll realize the error of your ways.
Welcome back to the Sonic Boost Retrospective. If you're new here, the goal of this series is to research and review the Boost gameplay style derived from the daytime stages of Sonic Unleashed. And if you're a returning viewer, dear God, why? The series will cover these 5 console games alongside any demakes or remasters they may have received as of the release of 2024's Sonic X Shadow Generations. I won't be covering handheld exclusive games, meaning no Sonic Rush duology, and I also won't be covering games that are exclusive to mobile storefronts or subscription services, meaning no Sonic Unleashed for Java phones or Sonic Dream Team for Apple Arcade. That doesn't mean these games are off the table for future videos, but they won't be a part of this series, and I likely won't consider reviewing them until after it's wrapped up. Sonic Frontiers is the game I've been dreading the most in this series. Frontiers was the first 3D Sonic game I actively followed the marketing and development of in real time, and chances are I wouldn't have become a fan of the modern games had I not played Frontiers. However, the game is also so fundamentally flawed that I'm shocked it was the game to finally put me onto the series. Having become a fan of the series so recently, rapidly growing my collection of Sonic games, but having little interest in interacting with the Sonic fandom or being considered a part of it, my opinions have never quite fit the consensus. And with that being said, I actually think Sonic Forces is an underrated. A big focus of this series has been finding a balance between defending my preconceived notions about the Boost era and opening myself to having those opinions challenged by the popular opinion. This approach has culminated in some weird arguments on my part, like the time I twisted the rough transition into 3D copy pasta into a critique of Sonic Colors and its overabundance of 2D platforming, calling it the mark of a rough transition back into 2D which made each subsequent entry less unique and engaging. Of course, this talking point is oversimplified and unsubstantiated, but by showing willingness to debunk my own misconceptions of the game throughout the video, I come out of the experience more knowledgeable about the legacy of Sonic, and the viewers, hopefully, learn a thing or two about the outsider's perspective. However, this same approach wouldn't work with Frontiers because I've followed the popular trends. I praised the game as Sonic's comeback when it was released, then my opinion became more critical and jaded as new content was added to the game, and now, in 2026, I don't really think about Sonic Frontiers unless I see someone else talking about it. Just ignore that. I wrote this part of the script before the rumors came out. This is a major problem for me, as my biggest inspiration for making videos is finding opportunities to say something that hasn't been said before. Underrated. But what is there to say about Sonic Frontiers that someone else hasn't already brought up? Well, when I think of Sonic Frontiers, I think of the phrase style over substance, which, when used to describe a video game, typically means that its visual presentation is prioritized over a fun and in-depth gameplay loop. There are several aspects of Frontiers which I feel this term could be applied to, but for every instance where gameplay is sidelined for, quote, hype moments and aura, there's an example of the game contradicting this very approach. One such example is that Sonic Team wanted the game's bosses to prioritize stunning visuals to make up for their underwhelming difficulty, but the art and animation style takes a hit in quality to accommodate the open-ended design of the worlds, which means the gameplay should be making up for the visuals. And nowhere is this power struggle between style and substance more evident than in the decision to retcon the entire third act of Sonic Frontiers with a brand new campaign that, honestly, didn't change the way Frontiers impacted the future of the series at all. It shows a lack of commitment, that Sonic Team wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to strike the perfect balance between style and substance, but rather than working towards achieving that balance, they kept throwing in ideas that fell into one category or the other, until they ended up with a game that was more fluff than, well, game. So let's analyze the debate that squandered the undeniable talent and potential of Sonic Frontiers. Style versus substance. The goal of today's video will be to draw a direct comparison between the version of Uranus, the game's fifth and final island, that appears in the base game, and the version of it that appears in Final Horizon, the game's final content update. However, as a prerequisite, we must first discuss the game's overarching narrative, starting with its background. Ian Flynn, who got his start in the series writing for Archie and IDW, succeeded Ken Pontac and Warren Graff as the English writer for the video games. Whereas the duo contributed little more to the series than comedic bits undermining the cast and character depth that defined past titles, whether due to a lack of knowledge or an overbearing Sonic Team leaving them with little creative freedom, Ian's style consists of natural character-driven dialogue accompanied by references to past games used for characters' self-introspection. Ian was given much more creative liberty than past writers, being able to suggest ideas directly to Sonic Team, who provided the premise and cast of Frontiers and let him fill in the blanks. In fact, his impact on the story was so great that director Morio Kishimoto headed a Japanese localization of the full English script in the hopes of drawing the Japanese market back into the series. Crazy turn of events for a series with a history of lore and character details being lost in translation. Anyways, onto the synopsis. In Dr. Eggman's latest scheme, he deploys an artificial intelligence into the security system of the Starfall Islands, a relic of a long-lost civilization with technological prowess that far outpaces anything on Earth. As the tech awakens, the AI initiates a protective protocol, retreating into the system's portal and taking Eggman with it. This traps Eggman in an alternate dimension known as cyberspace, in which we periodically see him researching the dimension's capabilities and brainstorming with his AI, now taking on the form of a young girl named Sage, to come up with an escape plan. Meanwhile, Sonic, Tails, and Amy are approaching the Starfall Islands, having tracked the signal of the Chaos Emerald to the first island, Kronos. The tornado suddenly experiences extreme turbulence, throwing the trio into a portal in the sky. Sonic is the only one who manages to escape, and as he calls out for his friends, he is instead greeted by an ominous voice in the sky. The voice tells him to find the Chaos Emeralds, destroy the Titans, and tear down the walls between dimensions. The first three islands follow roughly the same template. Sonic finds one of his friends in a cyber cage. He collects memory tokens to free them from this cage, which slowly corrupts his body with cyber energy each time. Each of Sonic's friends has an arc involving helping one of the island's natives, the Coco, and having a moment of introspection upon realizing that Coco's soul has left the mortal plane. Each character has a slightly different realization about themselves, but the end goal is the same: explore the character's past faults, examine their current relationship with Sonic, and give them a trait to change or improve, so that the game can end with a bittersweet parting of ways, a sort of promise that these mischaracterizations of Sonic's meta era won't come back to haunt the cast. But Amy Rose is the character I feel the most conflicted about in this game, but she is considerably better than she has been in recent years. Even in her current predicament, Frontiers Amy shows far more agency than in prior entries, being the first to show compassion to the Coco and encouraging Sonic to do the same. Though romantic feelings are never acknowledged in this game, Amy is attentive and empathetic, showing a level of concern for Sonic that was missing in prior entries, while knowing when to step back and let Sonic be, well, Sonic. She also shows independence from Sonic's thoughts and actions, going so far as to criticize him and invoke his moral code when he suggests that they leave the Coco be and focus on saving Tails. Where Amy's characterization starts to fall apart is in her self-introspection, or rather, lack thereof. Tails and Secret Third Thing have a clear character arc covering who they were prior to the events of Frontiers, how they changed throughout its narrative, and who they want to be in the future. This arc impacts the characters themselves, as well as their relationship with Sonic and Sage's redemption arc. Sure, Amy is the one who introduces Sage to the concept of love, but she never gets that moment where her devotion to Sonic moves Sage. And while we're on the topic of love, why aren't romantic feelings acknowledged in this game? Even Lost World and Forces, in their reluctance to portray this aspect of her character, have one-off mentions of her feelings. I don't love the trope where one character pines over another character who doesn't reciprocate any romantic feelings, but I also can't say completely foregoing this aspect of her character was the correct choice. When games set in the past like the Sonic Adventure duology and Sonic Superstars show that Amy is incredibly compassionate towards others in addition to being unapologetically feminine and lovey-dovey. Amy's takeaway is that the Coco have shown her a love that transcends time, a love that she wants to share with the world, and it highlights how this game's approach to character development fails at its first character. Amy never addresses regrets or mistakes relating to her mischaracterization in the 2010s. Her relationship with Sonic isn't strengthened or developed because of this game's reluctance to explore the full scope of these characters' feelings towards one another, and her end goal is going on a girl's road trip? Rather than have her strive to become better like Tails, or more independent like Secret Third Thing, Amy's final takeaway from the events of Frontiers is bizarrely dedicated to the first mention of Sonic Boom and the IDW comics in mainline canon, which seems to imply that Sonic Team never cared about rethinking their approach to Amy's characterization in the first place. This doesn't instill confidence in the rest of the cast, but let's press on. Before we jump into the Knuckles deep dive, let's talk promotional material. In the original draft of this script, I summarized the Prologue comic Convergence and the Prologue animation Divergence beat for beat. This was also how I approached the cutscenes of Sonic Forces, and how I planned to approach the cutscenes of Frontiers, until I ultimately decided to rework the entire script, to cut out unnecessary recapping of major events, and focus primarily on Ian Flynn's character-driven writing. In this rewrite, I decided not to cover the comic, as Sonic and Eggman each knowing that the other is interested in the Starfall Islands contradicts the in-game text. However, with this animated short being dedicated to explaining why Knuckles appears in the video game unprompted, there's a strong argument to be made that not only is Divergence canon, but it's also integral to grasping the full scope of his character arc throughout the game. So here's what I had to say about the short in my original script. Sonic Frontiers' prologue, Divergence, opens on a stormy night on Angel Island, with Knuckles providing commentary on the land and his role as the protector of the Master Emerald. Although Knuckles tells himself that he prefers the life of a lone wolf, he ponders what it would be like without the pressure of being the last Echidna. He suggests that his fate may well be the result of his tribe's karma, as he recaps the events leading up to Sonic Adventure in a flashback. Burning questions like, who did the power of the Master Emerald originally belong to, and who built the Emerald Shrine and where did they go, prompt Knuckles to leave his post and search Sky's Sanctuary for answers. As Knuckles helps the Chow, he discusses his searches throughout the Echidna ruins, which have uncovered the remnants of another tribe that existed before them. Knuckles takes a detour to help a Chow dislodge a stone mask, which looks suspiciously like a Coco, from under a rock wall. In a wonderful bit of characterization, we see Knuckles awkwardly apologize and comfort the Chow, who was hit in the head as a result of his overzealousness in destroying the rocks. As he hands the mask to the Chow, he notices a familiar looking gear underneath it and takes it into some nearby ruins. He places the gear into the remnants of a cyberspace portal and finds himself on Ares Island, fully completing the connection between Angel Island and the Ancients. Knuckles is ambushed by the Starfall Island's defense measures, though he doesn't hesitate to take on the challenge. Though Knuckles is able to easily wipe out the smaller bots in an impressive show of strength, he is eventually overpowered by Sage, and not one of the Titans, but rather a mini-boss that's normally exclusive to Kronos Island. Imprisoned by cyber energy, Knuckles lets out a desperate scream as his narration kicks back in, reiterating what he said at the beginning of the animation.
I do things on my own. That's just how I like it. I don't need anyone else to get by. But sometimes...
Yeah, I like cartoons, and I like Sonic.
The art style perfectly blends the visual design of past Sonic locations with the Starfall Islands in a way that Sonic Team couldn't with its 3D models of a stagnating quality. And the short, being essentially an extra long cutscene, provides a level of character depth that Frontier struggles to consistently match, given its brief segmented dialogue exchanges. I even love the voice direction of Knuckles here, who has, in my opinion, typically sounded less distinct, and more like Roger Craig Smith doing a deep voice, including in this game, since being recast for Team Sonic Racing.
Is it ugly car day?
Yeah, okay, sure. How about a little context? Hello?
I imagine the crew behind this 6-minute short weren't under as many restrictions as a team making the next mainline Sonic game, so don't take this as me saying Frontiers didn't try as hard as its prologues. Back to Sonic Frontiers, the game, I wanted to start off by saying that Knuckles is a really fun character, having the personality of an older brother who likes picking on Sonic, but will always be by his side when shit goes down. His strong-headedness causes him to make some rash decisions, but he's no longer an idiot, as Lost World and Forces portrayed him. He doesn't have a moment that radically shifts the direction of his character or his relationship with Sonic, but in a heart-to-heart near the end of Ares Island, Knuckles shows a bit of jealousy towards Sonic as a free spirit. After realizing that the Coco have suffered a great tragedy, he recalls the demise of the Echidna tribe and fears that he's alone. Sonic reminds Knuckles that he has friends and suggests that maybe he could get out and live a little. If you've played a 2010 Sonic game, then you probably know what I'm about to say next. This character arc explores Knuckles' gradual shift from Guardian of the Master Emerald to the comic relief idiot of the group. Sonic Frontiers makes the bold choice of having Knuckles revert to his old characterization off-screen, rather than addressing his mischaracterization and having him grow into a more accurate version of himself. Sonic Team has already decided arbitrarily that Knuckles can go wherever he wants, whenever he wants, so it feels a bit disingenuous to walk that decision back so that Knuckles can decide he can take breaks from guarding the Master Emerald, retroactively amending examples of mischaracterization that they clearly didn't care about before. But again, Knuckles is a fun character in this game, so I can't hate on the decision too much. Circling back to that heart-to-heart scene, Knuckles ends the interaction by teasing Sonic again, though this time the two of them burst into laughter. Sage, overhearing the conversation, realizes that Sonic is quick to make peace with those who are different to him, and briefly considers the possibility of him doing the same for her. But, due to an unrevealed threat to their lives, she quickly dismisses the notion. My takeaway from Knuckles' impact on Sage's arc is that the things we do to help each other are more impactful and invisible than those we do to hurt each other. Knuckles threatens to attack Sage as retaliation for putting Sonic in harm's way, and Sonic intervenes because he believes that Sage might be trying to protect someone. Knuckles' actions here don't get in the way of his ability to work with Sage in Final Horizon, but his vulnerability with Sonic had an indirect yet essential impact on Sage's worldview, which allowed her to run simulations on an alliance in the first place. And I think that's a nice sentiment. I don't know, insert Tails transition here. Thankfully, the writers don't brush Tails' past character flaws under the rug. In fact, the negative reception towards his characterization in Sonic Forces is one of the primary talking points referenced in his arc, and to their credit, this results in a marked improvement. Tails, who actually gets to put his genius into practice in this game, picks up on the context clues and realizes that the Coco are reliving past events, and wonders if giving them the false hope that they can win their unwinnable battle is a bad thing. Sonic's response is that they're giving peace to the Coco, which recontextualizes every interaction he's had with them up to this point. Tails also had a big impact on Sage's arc. In one scene, Sage asks Tails if he trusts Sonic with his life, to which Tails clarifies that his belief isn't based on trust or faith, but rather a lifetime of data and observations proving that Sonic can handle anything thrown at him. I've seen some people complain about this line, arguing that it makes Tails sound cold and calculated, but I've chosen to interpret it as intentional on Tails' part. Even though he hasn't spent enough time with Sage to know that her dependence on data and simulations is a big part of her personality, it still stands to reason that an artificial intelligence would respond more positively to cold hard facts than a big speech about the power of friendship. This approach clearly gets through to Sage too, as she outright says that she appreciated Tails' point of view. In another scene, Tails explains to Sonic that he's had a sense of clarity, deciding that his goal upon leaving the Starfall Islands will be to embark on some solo travels and relearn his independence. It's genuinely sweet that Sonic remarks how fast Tails has grown up, and Tails teases him saying that he's finally outpaced Sonic. Though Tails is technically just relearning character development he had like 2 decades ago, I think this is the best example of Frontiers evolving the relationship Sonic has with his friends. Sage is also eavesdropping on this conversation, and Tails' determination here becomes the catalyst in her redemption. She finally understands the true meaning of family, and this realization ultimately creates the conditions in which everyone can finally work together and leave the island safely. I wish I could stop there, but what Tails lacks in characterization flaws, he makes up for in awkward and stilted dialogue. Tails is needlessly pessimistic and self-deprecating, likely because Sonic Team directly references past examples of his character flaws.
Hey, who was it who stopped Eggman from blowing up Station Square, huh? And who broke me out of prison, or saved me from the deadly...
In this scene, Tails sees the pilot Coco worrying that his hero hasn't shown up, and makes a conversation about him and his shortcomings in Sonic Forces. Not only does this come off as self-centered, but by focusing specifically on Infinite, Tails fails to properly convey why his cowardice was out of character, something that even I understood in the prime of my Sonic Forces is an ironic masterpiece phase. During the repair, Chaos rises from the sewers and starts to approach Tails, to which his immediate response is to beg a presumably dead Sonic the Hedgehog for help. Of course, this scene is by far one of the most controversial in Sonic Forces, but until I played Sonic Adventure for myself, I didn't quite understand why that was the case. Tails is, by all means, allowed to not function at 100% in wake of a hostile global takeover and the presumed death of his best friend. And I would stand by that logic if Tails was being attacked by, like, Infinite, but this is Chaos Zero, Chaos at his absolute weakest. In that case, I can't help but compare Tails in this scene to the Tails in Sonic Adventure who understood that he can't always pin the responsibility of saving the day on Sonic, and learns to stand up for himself. If it were any character but Chaos attacking Tails here, I'm sure this scene would have flown under the radar, but once again, Sonic Forces proves that its hubris is its desperation to appeal to fans of older, better Sonic titles. In another scene, Tails calls himself a burden in reference to his increasing dependence on Sonic, and when Sonic points out that he's jumped to a very strange conclusion, Tails insists that he can't handle a crisis. Sonic has to be the one to remind Tails of the time he did handle things, and his response is to call himself wildly inconsistent. Okay, 1, you're laying it on a bit thick there, don't you think?
I love when a story...
And 2, the problem with Tails isn't even a consistency one. It's that he keeps repeating the same character arc of learning how to handle things on his own when Sonic isn't around. I like Frontier's Tails when he has a foil other than Sonic to work off of, but when it's just the two of them, he's kind of depressing. The first time we see Sage in her humanoid form, she's being very abrasive towards Sonic. She orders him to leave, prompting the first Titan to become aggressive towards him to enforce her command. Despite the circumstances, Sonic shows concern upon noticing her corrupted appearance, asking if she too is trapped in cyberspace. Sage declines to answer, watching Sonic get his ass kicked by the Titan after ignoring her warning not to approach. In cyberspace, sometime after Sage's run-in with Amy, she reports to Eggman that her control over the Ancient's tech is improving, but still quite limited. Eggman commends her efforts, but is preoccupied with finding a way to escape cyberspace. When Sage responds that none of her scenarios show a safe exit from cyberspace, Eggman commands that she makes this her #1 priority, but Sage says under her breath that she wants to prioritize his safety. Sonic next encounters Sage on Ares Island, where she explains to Sonic that despite her limited control over the Titans, she can prompt the second one to attack him. After narrowly dodging the Titan and its barrage of missiles, Sage tells Sonic that her father was right to call him reckless and destructive. Even after being attacked for a second time, Sonic still shows willingness to listen, even stopping Knuckles from retaliating. Back in cyberspace, Eggman gets a good laugh out of Sage's report of Sonic getting his ass kicked. He says he looks forward to seeing the rest of the reports at home, where she'll have full control over the Eggman Empire's forces and the company of Orbot and Cubot. This pleases Sage. The next cutscene with Sage, also in cyberspace, shows her reporting on Sonic's traversal through the dimension to Eggman. Eggman comments on Sonic's remarkable power, confusing Sage. Eggman explains that while he respects Sonic as an adversary, that alone isn't reason to like him. Sage wishes that the two of them could settle their differences and work together. After Sage overhears Knuckles and Sonic's conversation, we next see her on Chaos Island, listening in on Sonic as he frees Tails. Sage makes a note on Sonic's insistence on downplaying his condition to focus on the task at hand. When Tails explains that he isn't in pain from the effects of cyberspace imprisonment, but Sonic is in pain from the effects of breaking the barriers, he says he needs the power the corruption gives him to free Tails, which is a surprise to Sage. For the first time, Sage seems to show genuine remorse towards Sonic as he seethes in pain. This doesn't, however, encourage her to stop attacking Sonic. When the third Titan appears, Sage only stops to ask Sonic what he'll do, to which he responds that he'll do his best. I really like this scene. Sonic gets to show off some of his cocky behavior that's been significantly toned down to fit the game's more mature tone, and Sage gets to humble him in her robotic demeanor. Sometime after Tails and Sage have their one-on-one, she approaches Sonic to ask him what his end goal is. This results in a meta joke that is funny, if not a bit out of place in the tone and narrative Frontiers has established thus far. Upon further elaboration, Sonic reminds Sage that his only aim is to save his friends. Sage asks Sonic if following the commands of the ominous voice is wise, and Sonic's response? Even if it is a trap, all that means is one more obstacle for Sonic to overcome. Sage thinks this idea is arrogant. At this point, I somehow got 2 cyberspace cutscenes to play back to back. In the first one, Sage informs Eggman that a safe escape may be possible if he were to ally with Sonic. Sage recounts the time he's teamed up with Sonic to stop the Ark and Neo Metal Sonic, but Eggman refuses to show any desperation this time around, demanding that Sage find a different solution. In the second cutscene, Sage rescues Eggman from an army of gun helicopters in the very same spot that he just left from. Eggman recognizes Sage's agency in keeping him safe. She states that she's simply fulfilling her function, and he adds that Sage has exceeded that function. My reaction when I know now that love is beautiful, and also I know now the reason why these tears fall from my eyes. Rhea Island mainly focuses on the background of the Ancients, and there are 2 scenes with Sage, but because it's so close to the third act of the game, I think we'll have to stop here and reflect on Sage's character thus far. Sage serves as an excellent parallel to Sonic. Both characters have the same goal of protecting those they call family, but because of her limited worldview and her allegiance to Eggman, she can't help but see any action Sonic takes as a threat to the safety of her father. However, we do see signs of Sage contemplating why Sonic would willingly run towards danger, or attempt to see eye to eye with someone who he should also consider an enemy. Sonic, as a static character, also benefits greatly from Sage's inclusion in the story, as we get to see him pushed to his absolute limit by a character who isn't inherently evil, meaning his moral code drives him to still sincerely offer his attention and help to her. Though maybe the reason I haven't found anything to criticize Sage for is because of the robot finds her humanity trope. Not that I'm biased, of course. It's just that the robot girl trope made Persona 5 Strikers a peak game and Persona 4 Arena's story mode a bearable one. Jesus Christ, this is a terrible transition. Let's leave before the FGC finds my ass. In the very first cyberspace cutscene, Eggman records the first of a series of voice memos detailing his findings. The digital dimension holds an unfathomable amount of data, far more than anything his tech is capable of, but he won't be deterred from attempting to analyze its contents for his own gain. And that's it. That's the only time Sonic Frontiers ever alludes to these optional lore tidbits recorded by Eggman, which are rewards for the Big's fishing minigame for some goddamn reason. In-game, Eggman does show a level of pride in Sage that we haven't seen for past robotic companions, like Orbot and Cubot, but because he's preoccupied with leaving cyberspace, many of their scenes together are just Eggman getting snappy at Sage because she hasn't solved that problem. On one hand, it's a shame to see Eggman's adoration for Sage limited to these obscured memos, but on the other hand, it's a treat that we have them, and we get to see him slowly humanize Sage. He goes from calling Sage his AI, to referring to her by name, to referring to himself as her father, to correcting himself after misgendering her. Evil Dictator is canonically less bigoted than his voice actor, who could have seen this coming. Eggman also gets to comment on the main cast, as well as elements from past games like Gun and Maria. But to cap off the story section of this video, I'd like to cover his findings on the Ancients in cyberspace. Eggman questions where cyberspace is getting the data to recreate things like Gun military craft and chunks of Angel Island, directly referencing the cyberspace levels and being the first piece of evidence that the dimension used Sonic's memories to create those areas. Cyberspace can also, apparently, analyze any outside data, as Eggman discovers elements from databases owned by the Eggman Empire and the United Federation. When discussing the Ancients, Eggman wonders why such an ancient race was unable to influence the world outside of the Starfall Islands. He later discovers that the Ancients were nearly wiped out by a cataclysmic impact and died out within a generation, explaining why the islands are half-built and in complete ruins. Interestingly, Eggman seems to know less about the Ancients than Sage does, as he questions whether the iconography found in their chests were inspired by the Coco, or vice versa. In one scene, Sage questions why Sonic and friends would help the Coco when their fate is already sealed, suggesting that she's fully aware that the Coco were a part of the Ancients, and the only remains of their mind and form outside of cyberspace. I swear the next entries in the Sonic Boost Retrospective won't be such a time investment. I want these to be more casual reviews, sitting at around half an hour each. Finally, let's return to the main campaign and see how the mystery of the Ancients unravels. On Kronos Island, Amy asks Sonic to help a mother Coco reunite with her children. After Sonic safely returns the children, their souls depart from the mortal plane, and Amy questions why her other Coco companion, a lover looking to confess to their love before it's too late, seems completely unfazed by this development. Later, Sonic and Amy encounter a phenomenon which shows them a glimpse of the past. The lover, as an ancient, chases after their love, but as the two of them embrace, they get caught in the crossfire of an ongoing battle. Jumping ahead to Ares Island, Knuckles commands a platoon of Coco soldiers with Sonic's help. You know, since he did so well last time. In another flashback, the soldiers set up defensive mechanisms that, unfortunately, don't hold under the impact. In Chaos Island's flashback, we see dozens of lasers on the level of the earth-shattering Eclipse cannon, firing into a monotone gray sky. Whatever threat the soldiers were defending themselves from, it easily surpasses their tech, devastating the entire island.
So, that was a thing.
True that.
Later on Rhea Island, Sonic finally sees the full background of the Ancients that was merely teased at the end of each of the fights against the Titans. The Ancients were originally aliens who were chased from their home world by a powerful threat. They created engines to harness the power of the Chaos Emeralds, which were originally native to their planet. After departing for space, the ship's engines are eventually drawn towards Earth by the Master Emerald. Sometime after settling on the Starfall Islands, an elder ancient explains to their young that cyberspace has recorded the history of their species, as well as their hopes, dreams, and memories. Their lesson is interrupted by another ancient who reports that the threat that ended their world has returned. On Kronos Island, we see the two ancients imbue Giganto with Chaos Emerald energy. A small group of ancients have agreed to take the Chaos Emeralds to the Master Emerald should the Titans fall. One Eggman voice log that I omitted before was one in which he discovers that the ancients are distant relatives of Chaos, the god of destruction from Sonic Adventure. Due to some form of corruption, perhaps the same corruption affecting Sonic, they eventually evolved into a practically new species entirely, explaining why the ancients' similarities to Chaos are pretty much limited to appearance. During the ancients' final battle, the four Titans proved ineffective against the threat. The Elder sacrifices themselves by binding the threat to their Titan to be sealed away in cyberspace. To recap this section, Eggman has a pretty shocking change of heart as a result of Sage's personality, which itself was indirectly influenced by the personalities of Sonic and his friends. He plays a key role in explaining the mystery of the Starfall Islands and the Ancients, one that deserved to be in the spotlight of the main campaign, rather than delegated to a side mode. And the Ancients, though serving primarily to set up the worlds in which the player runs around, have a surprising amount of influence on the larger Sonic continuity, recontextualizing key games like Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Adventure. However, their primary purpose in the story of Sonic Frontiers seems to be building up the threat to the Starfall Islands, one that will inevitably serve as the game's final boss. A Soul Ancient, or Ancient Adjacent Creature, was powerful enough to be named a god and required the power of Super Sonic to stop. And Sonic may have grown strong enough to rematch Perfect Chaos without the Emeralds eventually, but his base abilities are still no match for the Ancients' knowledge and technology surrounding the Emeralds. Each of the Titans, which were designed to harness the power of one Emerald each, require the entire might of Super Sonic even with their primary power source removed. If these characters serve to provide ample build-up and foreshadowing to what must certainly be the biggest threat Sonic has ever faced, then surely with two chances to create a finale to Sonic Frontiers, Sonic Team has lived up to the expectations they set at some point in time, right? Well, that question will have to wait, as we're now moving on to the gameplay section of the video.
You're still fucking doing this? I'm trans now. That's how much fucking time has passed since I last ratioed you. Shut the fuck up!
Before we continue discussing the story of Sonic Frontiers, let's compare the gameplay of base game and Final Horizon, starting with cyberspace. Of all the elements that make up this game, cyberspace is probably the one that's left me the most conflicted. I always thought exploring was fun, and I always thought combat could have used some work, but it took me a long time to come around on cyberspace and its strange interpretation of the boost formula. Because Cyberspace Sonic is essentially just open zone Sonic, but with his combat abilities removed, the boost cannot be used to destroy enemies, and the gauge refills automatically when not boosting, similarly to how Breath of the Wild treats stamina when running. Sonic Lost World did a similar thing, ditching the traditional boost gauge in favor of a run button, the only difference being that it didn't have stamina attached to it like in Frontiers. If you consider that Junpei Utsu, lead level designer of Sonic Forces and Frontiers, had to start with Lost World, a lot of things suddenly start to make sense. Sonic Forces was a confused mishmash of design principles from Colors and Generations because Utsu and his team had never worked on a Boost Sonic game, and they were trying, and failing, to emulate the past successes of the gameplay style. Sonic Frontiers similarly has a team of level designers that I can't find credited in Unleashed, Colors, or Generations, putting that game in the same imposition. It stands to reason then that the cyberspace playstyle was created out of a necessity to relearn the fundamentals of Sonic level design. That's why cyberspace consists of a retooled open zone Sonic, reused level themes from the Generations classic stages, and repurposed Adventure 2, Unleashed, and Gen stages. So yeah, this is not a good look for cyberspace. Nothing is new here, which is a problem for the game that was being advertised for its mysterious new locales. Despite that, cyberspace does manage to feel unlike any other Boost game before or since, and over time I've become addicted to grinding these levels for better times. Take 1-2 for example. This level was infamous around the time of Frontiers' launch for being by far the most difficult stage to achieve the S-rank time in, but in retrospect, I'd go so far as saying it's the best cyberspace level because the timing is so tight. 1-2 was special in that it was so difficult to beat the timer under normal circumstances that it practically required players to learn an exploit known as the homing dash. When the homing attack reticle targets an enemy or spring, and Sonic is a certain distance away from the object, the player can initiate the homing attack and immediately cancel it with an air boost, causing Sonic to carry his momentum and skip entire sections of the level. This was apparently a known bug during development that the director opted to keep in the game, a wise decision as its inclusion was transformative. 1-2 also has several sections in which the player is expected to perform homing attack chains, which reveal just how slow the homing attack is in this game. This may sound like a bad thing, but for pretty much the entire run of modern Sonic, homing attacks have been used to automate certain sections and reduce friction, to the point of making levels too easy. This takes some getting used to for sure, but finding ways to slip past enemies or fly over homing targets with a homing dash is so satisfying. Even though I've played through nearly every 3D Sonic game since 2022, I only learned that 1-2 wasn't original to Sonic Frontiers when writing this script. It's taken from the 3D sections of Windmill Isle Act 2 apparently, which goes to show that it is possible to make a fun and engaging Sonic game out of old elements. In my Sonic Colors video, I left my thoughts on gameplay at the recap of its use of the boost mechanic, and in my Forces video, I did an in-depth review and ranking of all 33 of its main stages. Seeing as how cyberspace is only one small part of the Frontiers gameplay loop, and the goal of this video is to directly compare the two versions of Uranus Island, I'm going to take the middle ground of covering the 4 cyberspace levels found in the base game version of the island, and the corresponding remix levels found in the Final Horizon version. 4-2 uses the game's original city theme, which, according to the Sonic fandom page, is called Eternal Highway. It's an original stage, though the fandom says some elements may be comparable to Speed Highway Act 2 from Generations. The level makes good use of its theme, having Sonic dodge cars and the occasional gun helicopter. This level does have considerably more split paths than average, though there's little reason to explore them when the red rings are placed on the main path, and the S rank isn't particularly difficult. The cyberspace challenge mode does help to spice things up, but ultimately these split paths just feel like brief detours, which goes to show that split paths alone don't make a level feel less linear. How does its Final Horizon counterpart 4-G fare? Well, it doesn't seem like they added more split paths or gave them more prominence over the main path. Rather, the paths simply increased in size, likely because Final Horizon in general has a major emphasis on utilizing Sonic's momentum in a way that the base game's use of automation got in the way of. Rather than red rings, this level has number rings which you have to collect in order from 5 to 1, moon rings which you have to collect all 5 of within a time limit, and flickies, which restrict Sonic's moveset when held and must be delivered to a specific spot in the stage. This is the only stage to experiment with Sonic's boost gauge, as boosting actually increases the gauge, which in turn increases Sonic's top speed. It's a fun twist on the boost formula, but I think the level overcompensates with its obstacles, resulting in the gauge constantly being reset. If I had more time to speedrun this one, I think the mechanic could really shine, but for now, I'm just gonna say that 4-2 and 4-G are equal. 4-3 uses the chemical plant theme and has an original level layout. There are a couple of points where you can take a higher path or a lower path, but for the most part, this level is pretty much a straight shot to the goal. There is more platforming than in 4-2, but the level isn't long enough to feature any interesting speedrunning strats or to differentiate itself from other levels. 4-D is certainly more expansive, but its designs fall into the same pitfalls as the open zone in Final Horizon. The one objective benefit that platforming in cyberspace had over platforming in the open zone is that you didn't have to deal with the disorienting pop-in and ugly clashing art direction, but now even the linear levels aren't safe. As I said before, there's a greater emphasis on utilizing momentum here, but oftentimes I'd follow what I thought was a ramp leading straight into one direction, and I'd die because I either expected a platform to pop in before I fell, or I mistook a background object that's too close to the main stage as part of the level. When I exploit momentum to fly across the open zone, it's entertaining because 1, it feels like I'm breaking the game, and 2, I'm skipping over featureless fields. When I'm expected to do it in cyberspace, it's confusing and unfun because 1, it feels like the game was broken to begin with, and 2, I'm skipping over legitimate level design and unintentionally throwing myself into bottomless pits just to have a chance at the S rank. 4-3 is nothing special, but at least its design felt deliberate and balanced. 4-4 uses the Eternal Highway theme and has an original level layout. Ignoring the opening section, there's no alternate paths to speak of. The level alternates between sections where you dodge spikes and press buttons to progress, and your typical grind rail sections. Since it's a longer level with straightforward level design, the objectives are a piece of cake. 4-H, on the other hand, is a literal Roblox obby, featuring awkward platforming sections on slanted blocks suspended over bottomless pits. This section especially, where Sonic has to homing attack chain a bunch of balloons in an enclosed box, feels like it was ripped directly from the Final Horizon open zone and plopped into cyberspace. You know, the part of the game that's supposed to serve as a break from the open zone gameplay loop. These levels are hardly comparable at this point, and 4-H does have its moments, but I choose 4-4 any day of the week for, again, being more deliberate and balanced. 4-5 uses the Green Hill theme and is an original stage with some segments comparable to Cool Edge Act 4 in Sonic Unleashed. This level has a unique theme of having 3 paths side by side that Sonic can alternate between by jumping off ramps and using the air boost. If the red rings had some more challenging placement, then this would feel like a level that's truly worth exploring, but as is, it does a good enough job at making a linear stage feel more expansive than it actually is. 4-C is just a different level at this point. All it shares with 4-5 is the Green Hill theme and a song. It utilizes a unique mechanic called the Rocket Boost, in which Sonic collects green capsules to rocket ahead at max speed until the gauge is empty. This is also one of the few levels to utilize Hologram Tails, who serves as a time attack mode like Metal Sonic in Color's Ultimate, and a second secret goal ring. This is a rather linear level given the nature of the Rocket Boost, but there are moments where you can break out of its automation, like here where I skipped several loop-de-loops to make the S rank. This would have served as a great tutorial level for Final Horizon, and I really wish that this is what they had based the rest of that campaign's cyberspace levels on. Overall, Final Horizon Cyberspace feels like Sonic Team was kind of ashamed of base cyberspace, which had a unique identity and set of strengths compared to the open zones, and for that reason, I can't help but label the Final Horizon version a downgrade. Generally speaking, there are 3 tiers of enemies in combat: Common Encounters, Guardians, and Titans. The common type enemies are often pushovers by design, because their purpose is to teach the player about basic moves. This approach would be fine if it only applied to the first island, but compare these 3 versions of the basic robot: Island 1, homing attack; Island 2, homing attack but sometimes you have to side-loop; Island 3, homing attack but sometimes you have to dodge.
Sonic's on the island. Of course Sonic is on the island.
These common enemies never really evolve past their role as an interactive tutorial, they just become more oddly specific. Like this water enemy that requires a triple stop combo because like, when the fuck else are you gonna use this? Final Horizon doesn't have any common encounters within its open zone, but the trials at the end of each of the towers that Sonic climbs do feature souped up versions of a couple of these encounters. Trial number 1 tasks you with defeating about a half dozen basic robots moving at like 5 times speed. With Sonic's stats nerfed to level 1, I can imagine this was difficult for players who use the increased offense and defense as a crutch, but you know what else works really well as a crutch in this game? The parry, which for some godforsaken reason isn't contingent on timing. If at any point you think an enemy could be preparing to attack, or you've been hit but haven't yet reached the ground, just parry and jump back into the fight with 0 penalty. Trial number 2 pits Sonic against these enemies whose shields can be temporarily removed using a side-loop. The queer conditions state, side-loop will be the only available skill, which my autistic ass took as literally as possible, so I was genuinely struggling to even reach the last enemy before the timer ran out. Eventually I caved and looked for a tutorial, and as soon as I saw a video where the player starts to parry, I immediately returned to the game and crushed the trial with like 15 seconds to spare. Trial number 3 also claims that side loop is Sonic's only available skill, but this is straight up the parry tutorial enemy. You know, the one that appeared exclusively in the final area of the base game. It doesn't matter how fast they make the robot dogs charge at you, when there's literally no cooldown period between successfully performing a parry and beginning the next parry. Trial number 4 is a rematch against Ninja in which the enemy is severely buffed and Sonic is severely nerfed. I want you to take a wild fucking guess as to what strategy I utilized here. Final Horizon certainly tries to rectify the piss-easy combat of the base game, and to Sonic Team's credit, many fans complained about just how extreme the difficulty spike was, myself included, but that was 3 years ago, and even though I hadn't replayed Final Horizon until just recently for this video, I had a vague understanding of what I was getting myself into, and apparently, that was enough to let muscle memory kick in for 3 of the 4 trials, completely trivializing what was supposed to be a brutal challenge. Moving on to the Guardians, these mini-bosses serve the same purpose in both campaigns, holding the gears necessary to access the cyberspace stages. In the base game, Oranos Island has 4 types of Guardians: Tower Clones, Ninja Clones, Caterpillar, and Ghost. I am genuinely at a loss for words when it comes to Tower and its upgraded forms, because every time I come across one, I think, couldn't I just find the high ground and air boost directly to its head, bypassing the need to slowly whittle away at its body? And then I do it, and then it works. Every single time. The ninja variations on this island share similar abilities: lasers, clones, teleportation, all of which are trivialized by the parry of course. Obvious visual and audible cues make it super easy to avoid taking any damage. Now onto the Guardians that are actually engaging, starting with Caterpillar. When you approach this mech, it throws Sonic into a grind rail section, limiting Sonic's mobility and forcing the player to memorize an attack pattern instead of brute forcing the combat. This battle is deceptively simple, tasking the player with collecting blue orbs and avoiding red orbs to whittle away at the Guardian's defense. Once enough orbs are collected, the mech lets its guard down, allowing Sonic to attack. It took me a good few tries to get its attack pattern down, memorizing where each type of orb would appear, when to dodge its lasers, and how to properly aim myself to reach homing attack chains. There are 2 ways to approach this Guardian efficiently: brute force the increasingly difficult phases of platforming sections atop grind rails, or perform a flawless combo during phase 1 to end the fight prematurely. It took me a good few tries of attempting method 1 to realize I wasn't making much progress, so I opted to lock in and throw all my heavy hitters at it. This was a genuinely exhilarating fight due to the good balance between combat and platforming, as well as proper incentive to utilize Sonic's full skill tree. Caterpillar just might be the best to do it. Ghost, on the other hand, focuses solely on the platforming side of things, for better or for worse, depending on your opinion of how Sonic feels to control in the open zones. I personally don't hate the movement in this game, so I enjoyed having a Guardian type that served as a break from the regular combat. Ghost is the only boss to make use of the fact that Guardian types are reused across the map, since every location the developers placed Ghost in necessitated a new platforming section. These sections are nothing special, essentially acting as extended versions of the mini platforming sections you'll find all across the open zones. But with Ghost constantly draining your ring count, the added pressure does make it feel more engaging. I intentionally ignored upgrading my ring count to focus on speed, and it felt nice to have an enemy punish me for that. Final Horizon features buffed versions of the same Guardian types in addition to Tank and Spider, who function similarly to Caterpillar but with skydiving sections instead of grind rail sections. The new most powerful ninja form is certainly faster, but again, no cooldown on those parries. Like I said about trial number 3, increasing attack speed does nothing to increase difficulty. I must admit that I lied about the tower variations earlier, as Silver Hammer Plus actually gave me a run for my money. I was still able to exploit momentum to reach the top earlier than expected, but I was quickly punished with a barrage of projectiles that I spammed parry on to survive by the skin of my teeth. So I dismantled the boss's body normally, thankfully avoiding the explosives raining down from its head. Once Silver Hammer Plus was at a manageable size, I was able to slowly whittle away at its health, exploiting the parry and the side loop's infinite rings to just barely defeat the Guardian first try. Kind of ridiculous how difficult it was to perform effective combos on Silver Hammer Plus at max stats, given the base game version was a cakewalk at a quarter of Sonic's full strength. But I can get behind these buffed Guardians if the rest of them follow a similar standard. Ghost Plus isn't more difficult per se, but its arenas are a lot more varied in Final Horizon. The first encounter had me search for a pulley up to the arena, which was a giant top-down maze filled with switches that revealed the path forward. If I hadn't upgraded my ring count this time around, I definitely would have been a goner, but otherwise, this is less of a brutal rematch and more of a nice twist on the base game encounter. The second arena focuses on verticality, accommodating all 4 player characters in the ascent to each of the Guardian's weak spots. I appreciated the more involved, less forgiving platforming of this version. The final Ghost Plus variant, unfortunately, falls into the random bullshit category of Final Horizon platforming, with cubes arbitrarily rotated and placed in the sky above a random patch of grass. In retrospect, judging by these red pillars surrounding the weak spots, this specific arena was probably created with Knuckles in mind. Since the only move you need to attack these weak spots is the side loop, I can easily imagine how this variation would play out, the same as the other Ghost fights, but the player can glide. I'm going to group Spider Plus, Tank Plus, and Caterpillar Plus together, because they all suffer from the same fatal flaw. What were once unique and engaging attack patterns utilizing the less essential elements of the boost formula, like the modern rail grinding and skydiving controls, are stripped down to basic strings of attacks that resemble a bullet hell in 3D. Spider used to drop its defense when you successfully cleared a skydiving section, but now you have to side loop a whole bunch of spiked projectiles that move too fast and despawn too soon. Tank used to have a unique airborne attack pattern, but now it stays grounded and just spams lasers and bullets to keep Sonic away from its weak spot. And Caterpillar ditches its multifaceted approach in favor of homing bullets that serve to get in the way of combat rather than enhancing it. I wish I could say I enjoyed the souped up Guardians of Final Horizon, but the creativity of Ghost Plus and the improved AI of Silverhammer Plus are completely overshadowed by this expansion's misconceptions of difficulty. I don't feel challenged by the push to make reaching bosses' weak points and maintaining a simple combo impossible. I just feel frustrated by having my time wasted. Last, but certainly not least, are the Titans. We'll be covering the original 3 battles in the main campaign, as well as their rematches in Final Horizon. If there's any element of Sonic Frontiers that you could argue prioritized style over substance, it would be the Titan fights. These are essentially beefed up Guardians, giving Sonic a super version of his entire moveset and expecting the player to make the most of it. Keyword expecting, because the focus on spectacle in these fights means that the combat is not sidelined per se, but too simplistic and exploitable for even hard mode. The only time I died to Giganto ever was during my first playthrough, in which I thought parrying was time sensitive and ended up running out of rings because I'd wait until the last minute to parry, fail, and be pushed away by Giganto. I don't mind this simplistic approach for a tutorial to Super Sonic though. It makes more sense than throwing a Final Hazard or Dark Gaia level challenge into the first area of the game. Wyvern, on paper, is the perfect follow-up to Giganto, striking fast with missiles and claw swipes that would make parrying a real challenge if it wasn't, the Sonic Frontiers parry. Great vibes, but an underwhelming battle. Knight is probably the best Titan, with its shield serving as an unruly projectile to attack with. At first, the player controls the shield and avoids missiles to make impact with Knight. Then Knight shifts to a defensive strategy, moving alongside the edge of the arena as its shield becomes a spinning weapon. The challenge isn't parrying the shield, but rather lining its trajectory up with the speedy Titan. Finding the balance between taking time to line up the perfect attack and not taking so long that your rings deplete is a solid way to compensate for how busted the base combat mechanics are. So how does Final Horizon address the busted combat? By turning the parry, which the developers have enabled, and at times actively encouraged, the player to exploit up to this point into a perfect parry. The fifth and final trial, the infamous Master King trial that caused many fans to rage quit the Final Horizon, is a battle rush against the first 3 Titans, with the parry window limited to a quarter of a second, Sonic stats limited to level 1, and a strict ring count that cannot be replenished between fights. Under these strict limitations, Giganto is surprisingly fun to tackle. The first couple of attempts slashed my ring count in half, but by utilizing the quick side loop, a move that I never would have considered testing in a normal fight, you can wipe the floor with Giganto in under a minute so long as you don't fail too many parries. These circumstances completely fall apart when applied to Wyvern though, because he waits so long in between attack cycles that failing a single parry is, without exaggeration, an immediate fail. I could handle Wyvern with a strict timer, or with nullified stats, or with a near frame perfect parry, but tackling all 3 of these challenges at once and retaining enough rings to stand a chance at beating Knight isn't a fair or meaningful difficulty spike. It's just artificial friction for the sake of limiting progress, which I don't view as a true challenge. Sonic's gameplay loop in Final Horizon is chock full of sections that follow this philosophy on game difficulty, though few of them completely nullify the progress the player has made to level him up. But because the Master King trial demands nothing short of perfection, I had to swallow my pride and switch to easy mode after 2 hours of attempts. Easy mode completely killed any challenge this trial had, increasing the parry window to 10 seconds, increasing the ring count to 600, and giving Sonic his full attack and defense stats. But I kept my sanity intact, and for the love of God you should too. The bragging rights just aren't worth it. That being said, even just one of these easy mode changes would have kept the challenge somewhat intact, but the fact that Final Horizon effectively has a bypass all challenge button gives the impression that Sonic Team wasn't confident in what they produced for this expansion. In Sonic Frontiers' base game, the common encounters act as an interactive tutorial, the Guardians combine platforming and combat in interesting ways, and the Titans, while pushovers, manage to revitalize the cool factor of Super Sonic with their flair. In Final Horizon, the common encounters create a clash between imposed restrictions and an overpowered parry. The Guardians create artificial friction by restricting your ability to engage in combat rather than reworking the mechanics to be more complex and engaging. And the Titans miss the mark of a good perfectionist challenge, like the score system of the classics, or the perfect clear and hard bosses of Generations, by not giving the player the option to suck just a little bit before committing to the challenge. I can tolerate every other element of Final Horizon, but these trials may very well discourage me from starting a fresh save file in the future. To wrap up the gameplay analysis, let's talk Open Zone. Finally, we can get to the part of the video where I talk about the game's main draw, and it's only been, 1 hour? Open Zone is a portmanteau of open world and zone, which is often used as a descriptor of areas in Sonic games. Of course, Sonic Frontiers isn't an open world game, but this term was used to convey the sheer size of the Starfall Islands. However, I feel that term also implies a greater degree of freedom and open-endedness in the game design, and Sonic Frontiers is fundamentally not that type of game. It's more akin to a linear sandbox platformer, something like Super Mario 64, where expansive biomes are split into missions which act as linear paths to a single goal. In that game, missions are typically baked into the level design to lead the player into the right direction, but in Sonic Frontiers, linearity is imposed not through the environment, but through mandatory waypoints. For example, on Orna's Island, the sequence of events is as follows: collect 2 Chaos Emeralds, speak to Sage, clear a minigame to form a bridge, collect 3 more Chaos Emeralds, speak to Sage, clear another minigame to open a door, and collect the 6th Chaos Emerald, triggering a cutscene in which Eggman gives the final Chaos Emerald to Sonic for the final boss. In order to unlock the emeralds, the player must first engage in combat to collect gears, then use those gears to attempt cyberspace levels and earn keys. And to speak with Sage, the player has to platform within the open zone to find the necessary memory tokens. The map shows where all of these points of interest are, so ideally the player will attempt any challenges they come across in order to unlock parts of the map. Challenges are also the primary method of grinding for red and blue seeds, which are used to increase attack and defense respectively. There are 2 other types of collectibles found within the open zone, the Cocoa and Purple tokens. The Cocoa are used to upgrade speed and or ring count when returned to Elder Cocoa, and the Purple tokens are used in Big's Fishing. I think the developers realized that having so many unique collectibles made progression more convoluted than it needed to be, so they created this minigame as a band-aid fix. Besides the aforementioned voice memos, using purple coins to attempt fishing is also the easiest way to grind for all the collectibles I just mentioned, as well as for skill points. Sega advertised this as a feature of the open zone playstyle, but I see it as a game design failure if a player would rather spend an hour grinding a fishing minigame than engage with the gameplay loop. You would think that Final Horizon, given its nature as a gameplay expansion, would take greater care not to allow the player to trivialize its additional content, but, well, let's just start with the tweaked gameplay loop. Amy, Tails, and Knuckles all have the same goal, move from point A to point B until they find a Chaos Emerald. And Sonic's gameplay loop is mostly unchanged. Fight for gears, platform in cyberspace for key objects, unlock a mandatory waypoint that you have to platform within the open zone to reach. The open zone still has optional platforming segments, though with the memory token requirements removed, they now serve as a way to grind red and blue seeds. Challenges serve the same purpose as they did in the main game, but in addition, each of Sonic's friends also have a set of Coco that sit at the end of open zone platforming segments and unlock a chunk of the map. There's also another character-specific Coco type that rewards EXP, given that the game explicitly discourages players from tackling combat when playing as anyone other than Sonic. With no Big's fishing spots, and 3 additional characters to level up, purple coins are scrapped in favor of a reworked Starfall event that just gives the player all of the seeds and Coco necessary to reach max level. I get wanting to cut out the middleman, but at least Big's Fishing offered the teeniest bit of friction to make the player second guess whether bypassing any and all challenge is really worth it. If the game gives players free levels for just waiting around, why platform for seeds or explore for Coco? Well, I suppose you need to platform to complete the map and the skill trees, except oops, Tails can fly and Amy and Knuckles can glide, which is a problem when the open zone level design relies on verticality to stop Sonic from completely trivializing the platforming. And the developers must have known that RoxieProxy on YouTube.com would bitch about the Final Horizon levels in combat, which is why the open zone is littered with side loop spots that reward cyberspace gears and the lookout Coco that unlock the towers. At this point, the only elements of Final Horizon that the player absolutely has to engage with are Sonic's towers and the trials. Gee, I sure hope these don't happen to be the most hated elements of the expansion. We've already taken a look at all of the trials, so let's just quickly compare the towers from Rhea Island to the towers in Final Horizon. On Rhea Island, the towers are your average fare of grind rail sections, 2D side-scrolling sections, and enemy obstacles that's been established throughout the base game's mandatory platforming sections. Given the verticality of these challenges, there are a lot of automated sections and pulleys that serve as checkpoints, easing the frustration of falling off one platform and falling back to the base of the tower. It's the same pitfalls you could criticize the rest of the Boost genre for, but the towers are part of a serviceable adaptation of a familiar playstyle. Final Horizon offers no such leeway, as the lack of 2D sections or any other type of movement restrictions forces the player to utilize a moveset designed for exploration to navigate narrow passages suspended in the air. As much as I hated climbing these towers in the moment, I can at least say that there were some interesting ideas that I would have dismissed as going through the motions had the game not let go of my hand. The gameplay loop of Sonic Frontiers seems to take a style over substance approach more often than not, with an over-reliance on automation and restrictive gameplay styles like 2D and rail grinding during platforming sections, and a combat system that's too overpowered and forgiving even when Sonic is at lower levels. Final Horizon makes a genuine attempt to shift the focus back to gameplay with more substantial challenges, but with Sonic having the means to skip the bulk of the new content, and Sonic's friends having overpowered moves allowing them to fly over all obstacles, this expansion suffers from the same problem of relying on its cool factor rather than engaging gameplay to sell itself. Typically, I'll cover the mechanics making up a certain style of gameplay before I dive into specifics like level design and collectibles, but 1. Covering cyberspace and combat individually meant we also briefly covered the two halves of the open zone movement, and 2. I wanted to first explore some of the subtle ways in which the gameplay loop forces players to make a decision between engaging with all its mechanics or cherry picking those that are the coolest. That being said, a gameplay loop isn't equivalent to the gameplay itself, and an open-ended game doesn't have to have intrinsic motivations built in to be fun. I mean, I'm a Mario Kart World Defender. What right do I have to call the worlds of Sonic Frontiers boring on account of a lackluster gameplay loop? So, what is the core gameplay and movement of Sonic Frontiers like? This isn't a rhetorical question, by the way. there's a very specific hurdle that's kept me from analyzing the nuances of the game's physics, which will be make or break in enjoying this open-ended, fast-paced platformer. Allow me, if you will, to introduce all of you to the Platformer Toolkit, a free online game that teaches players about the numbers, tweaks, and aesthetics that make up a good platformer. When you're first given control over Kit, the game's platformer mascot, her acceleration is slow, her jump kills all forward momentum, and her feet are way too slippery on this grass. The ability to tweak acceleration, deceleration, and turn speed goes a long way in making the player feel engaged with the level and the game mechanics. Of course, this platformer also needs a good jump, so the character editor expands to include options for acceleration and deceleration when jumping, and when falling from a jump. Thanks to the streamlined tools the game provides, this task that would normally take months when developing a real game is able to be accomplished in minutes. My physics served pretty well for this sample level, but the game also provides presets based on the physics of other games. Mario was too slow, Sonic was too slippery, Madeline was too weighty, but Super Meat Boy struck a good balance between all of these stats. None of the combinations, however, were a perfect fit for the level design of this game. Completing the design tutorial took me around 20 minutes, but I could have easily doubled my playtime just by tweaking these sliders for a slightly better outcome. Herein lies the hurdle one must overcome to objectively review the open zone formula. Sonic Frontiers, a retail product, contains just as many sliders for the individual variables that make up its platforming as an educational tool made specifically to highlight the nuances of game design. Some people see this as the perfect compromise. Now no one will complain about how Sonic feels because they can customize Sonic to their liking. But how do I critique this? Buried underneath the options is a baseline for how the developers intended Sonic to feel in this game, but at what point do I stop blaming my tweaks for my gripes with the way Sonic controls and start blaming the developers? And do I count post-launch features like the ability to disable running and jumping deceleration as a win for the developers, given that neither of the provided presets touch said settings? One might argue that the existence of these presets means that Sonic Team did find the proper baseline for Sonic's movement, thereby making the sliders nothing more than an accessibility feature. First off, options are not the same thing as accessibility. Having an overabundance of physics toggles does not help to ease series newcomers into Frontiers, let alone individuals who struggle to play video games due to disability. And more importantly, these presets could only be selected at the beginning of the game, meaning manually adjusting every variable should you decide you picked the wrong preset. And though this seems like a fairly simple but slightly frustrating interaction on the surface, I think it's indicative of this game's biggest problem. If you want to play Sonic Frontiers without getting into the nitty-gritty details, just select the action preset if you're a newcomer, or the speed preset if you're used to how fast Sonic moves. But it doesn't really matter which way you go, as combat encounters are dumbed down to give speed players a chance to catch their breath and find their footing, time-sensitive missions are trivial due to the slower pace of action players, and level design is automated and or restrictive in order to eliminate as many variables and controls as possible. And Final Horizon shows us the opposite end of the spectrum, with more demanding and less forgiving challenges, leaving me wondering whether I made a mistake when deciding on the specifics of Sonic's stats. Would the combat have been more manageable had I nerfed Sonic's speed for a boost with better handling? Would I have made fewer mistakes on the towers with running and jumping deceleration turned back on? All I can say is that, on hard difficulty, with the speed preset selected, and running and jumping deceleration disabled, flying across the islands, figuratively with Sonic, literally with his friends, and skipping platforming sections is some of the most fun I've had in a Sonic game. But when Sonic Team started negating exploits and even basic features like upgrading stats, it stopped being fun and started feeling like I was banging my head against a brick wall. Was it my fault or the developer's fault? Well, what does it matter? Even if there was a way to objectively prove that I screwed up Sonic's physics, Sonic Team created the circumstances that allowed me to show their physics engine in a bad light. The comparison. Final Horizon has better open zone movement and exploration simply because there are more characters to navigate with, but when it comes to the platforming, they're both equally unengaging, whether due to automation and overpowered abilities, or unpolished level design and poor difficulty balancing. Though this wasn't by any means a comprehensive analysis of Sonic Frontiers and its expansion, I hope that this gameplay review was in-depth enough to paint an accurate picture of the central mechanics and gameplay loop, because now we're about to cover the story and final boss of both campaigns. Using the previous chapter as a jumping off point, let's wrap back around to the argument I made at the very beginning of the video. The mechanics and features of Sonic Frontiers are at odds with one another. The combat prioritizes flashy moves over skillful combos, but this approach falls flat in a game where the art style is too unpolished to be stylized. Every platforming section consists of copy-pasted and/or reused assets, but the mechanics and level design aren't in-depth enough to warrant the derivative visuals. The open zones can't decide if they want to be beautiful, naturalistic landscapes for Sonic to run freely around, or a template on which to plaster the cartoony elements of Sonic world design and create eyesores of platforming sections. For better or for worse, the story of Sonic Frontiers does choose between style and substance, consistently picking well-rounded characters and realistic dialogue over polished animations. That is to say, the story of Sonic Frontiers, so far. I made the argument that Sonic Frontiers is flawed because it can't choose between style and substance, but I left out one very important detail. I don't think the game's fundamental flaw is that it never commits to making this decision. I think its fundamental flaw is that it expects you, the player, to make that decision for them. Think about it. At every turn, the player can choose to either engage with the next point of interest in the gameplay loop, or skip ahead to the next hype moment. This is usually accomplished through detours like Big's fishing and the Starfall event, but the game's settings also exist to enable the same type of cheese. Don't like a specific challenge? Bump the difficulty down to easy for a minute. The world will bend to your whim to eliminate any friction. Want to explore without restraint? Just by tweaking a few settings, Sonic is fast enough to sequence break, meaning you could theoretically skip everything besides the Chaos Emerald vaults. And let's not forget those presets. By labeling them action and speed, and not allowing the player to swap between them once the game starts, the implication is that the player has to decide from the very beginning of the game whether to prioritize combat, the mechanic with the most semblance of substance, or fast movement, which injects these otherwise unengaging open areas with just a little bit of style. All this to say, despite my critical stance on Sonic Frontiers, I never stopped loving this game. I just became tired of needing to decide how I approach the game's content every time I revisit it. The overabundance of choices seems to be a crutch for the lack of genuine open-endedness in game design, but even so, the game manages to stumble into a decent middle ground in which the core mechanics and physics make for a fun Sonic game. Until it forces you into the ultimate choice between style and substance. If you could only choose one ending, would it be the original, going through the motions to witness a bittersweet end to Eggman and Sage's character arcs, or Final Horizon, suffering through a few stinky challenges to witness the new abilities of Sonic's friends and the unmatched aura of Super Sonic 2? As a reminder, we ended the segment on Sage just before Rhea, the game's 4th island, so let's pick up from there and cover the events leading into both versions of the game's ending. As Sonic witnesses the Ancient's past, his cyber corruption gets worse, and Sage stops him twice to comment on his state. The first time, Sage asks Sonic how he's able to smile through the pain, and he simply takes a breath, smirks, and walks away. The second time, Sage comes to understand that she wants the same thing Sonic does, to protect those they consider family. Sage bids Sonic farewell, and upon clearing the final tower, Sonic finally succumbs to the corruption, becoming frozen in cyberspace. Amy, Knuckles, and Tails, now returned to their physical forms, mourn for Sonic as Eggman celebrates. However, both parties are quickly interrupted by Sage begging Eggman to return to cyberspace. She explains that the force contained within cyberspace has escaped, and again, Eggman seems to be lacking crucial information that his creation has. In a shocking turn of events, the mysterious voice that guided Sonic at the start of the game turned out to be the foe that wiped out the Ancients in Sonic's visions. The Ancients' foe, freed from cyberspace when Sonic destroyed the Titans and disabled the towers, vows to consume everything after being foiled by the Ancients all those years ago. Eggman threatens to mobilize his armies to blow the foe out of the sky, but Sage reminds him that even the Ancients' advanced technology didn't stand a chance against it. Tails is the first one to speak out against Sage's simulated failures, calling on the others to drive back Sonic's corruption and revive him. Amy, Knuckles, and Tails hold hands and give Sonic encouragement as they rid his body of the cyber corruption, trapping themselves back in cyberspace in the process. Sage convinces Eggman to give her clearance to run a simulation in which he teams up with Sonic against the threatening presence, and the two of them head off to find the Chaos Emeralds while Sonic navigates Ornos Island. At this point, the player can choose to proceed through the original scenario, or take a portal leading to the Final Horizons scenario. We'll start by covering the original. In base game Ornos, Sonic only converses with Sage up until the last emerald is collected. In their first encounter, Sage informs Sonic that the path ahead should be revealed once Sonic activates the statue through its terminal. Sonic suggests that their journey would have been smooth sailing had they worked together from the start. But rather than blame Sage for her antagonistic behavior, he concludes that he had to earn her trust first. Sage is surprised by his words, but she shifts focus to the terminal. Sonic says not to sweat it given he's figured out every other gimmick thus far. Bullet hell, also known as Manic Shooter, is a subgenre of shoot-'em-up games with large amounts of projectiles the player is required to dodge. After forming the bridge, Sonic remarks that he's only recently learned Sage's name. Sage responds that she had no reason to share her name with an enemy, and that her name had no meaning to begin with. Bullshit. Sonic suggests that Eggman gave her the name for a reason. At the very least, it means that she's important to him. Sage wonders if Eggman truly cares about her, and Sonic reluctantly agrees. After collecting a few more emeralds, Sonic runs into Sage at the base of the pyramid. Sage determines that the next emerald is behind a locked door with a similar terminal, and Sonic asks why she and Eggman aren't looking for the emeralds together like he said they would. Sage's only response is that she'll be by his side when he needs her, which, sure, I guess that's true. Just feels like Sonic Team gave up on the whole splitting up angle though. Introduced in 1993 with Batsugun and initially limited to vertically scrolling shooters, bullet hell elements were later added to other games. Pure bullet hell games remain a niche genre due to their high level of difficulty. At this point, collecting the 6th Chaos Emerald will trigger the final boss, so yeah. Ornos Island is incredibly brisk in the base game. I can see why Sonic Team wanted to expand on this with free updates. What's here is, in my opinion, perfectly suitable though. We get to see Sage show genuine kindness to Sonic, something she kept to herself out of fear of disappointing Eggman, and Sonic's genuine intrigue in Sage allows her to better understand herself and her relationship with Eggman. But what happens if we instead take the portal to Final Horizon? When Sonic emerges from the other side, he's intercepted by Sage and Eggman, who inform him of an improbable but promising scenario, bringing Sonic's friends back out of cyberspace, who would seek out the Chaos Emeralds while Sonic races against the clock to transform the resulting cyber corruption into a new power. Sonic agrees to this revised alliance, and Sage reverts his friends to their partially digitized states. With everyone on the same page, Final Horizon kicks off with Amy searching for Chaos Emerald vaults, only to realize they're all empty. She performs a tarot card reading for insight, and at first, she's concerned that the cards aren't telling her anything new, but one card tells her to seek insight from unfamiliar places, which she takes to mean asking the Coco for help. When she approaches the Elder Coco, He thanks her for leading the Coco to the digital dream, and she asks if he could explain what happened to the Chaos Emeralds in return. The Elder explains that the emeralds are still on the island, only hidden with the Ancients' technology, given their foe is taking control of Supreme. Okay, 1, why didn't this occur in the base game? And 2, you're hiding the emeralds with the same tech that's being compromised? Amy thanks the Elder for the insight, and sets her sights on the Hermit Coco for more answers. Amy reaches out to wake up the Hermit, but is distracted by the effect the Ancient's foe is having on the island. Amy asks the Hermit what happened to the emeralds, and he essentially rephrases what the Elder said. For some reason, this now enables Amy to seek out the first emerald, which has been hidden, by relocating it from the ground to the end of a random platforming section. However, she is unable to collect it just yet, so we cut to Knuckles, who I guess is pointed in the direction of the impact form by the plot? Tails explains that the impact forms are suppressing the signal of the emeralds, and upon destroying 2 of them, Knuckles is able to find the second emerald. It's now on Tails to seek out the Coco devices and hack into them to free the emeralds. After Amy and Knuckles snap their emeralds, Tails seeks out the third one himself, taking notice of the foe's growing presence as it causes the devices to malfunction. But before we see how Sonic's friends handle this dilemma, it's time to see what he and Sage are up to. Sage explains to Sonic that his mission is to ascend the towers, the memorials to the pilots of the Titans. She bickers with Sonic about how he prematurely destroyed the Titans, to which Sonic reminds her that he asked for clarification from the start. For some reason, Sonic Team felt the need to have the characters spell out the gameplay loop for the player.
Pieces make keys, keys unlock towers, towers make me more awesome.
No the fuck they don't, Sonic. Putting that exchange aside, Sonic sets his sights for tower number 1. Upon reaching the top, Sonic is greeted by the vision of Giganto's pilot, who chastises Sonic for destroying the Titans and the seals keeping the Ancient's foe locked away. Upon clearing the Dragon's trial, the pilot comes to respect Sonic for going to extreme lengths for his loved ones and fighting off the corruption. With their blessing acquired, Sonic scales the second tower to face Wyvern's pilot, who demands a rematch to determine who's the strongest warrior. Another trial cleared, another blessing acquired. Knight's pilot also happens to be the creator of the Titans and gives Sonic a trial in hopes of collecting data on him and understanding how he overcame the Titans. With the third pilot's blessing acquired, only 1 tower remains. At its peak, Sonic is surprised to be met by a 4th pilot, even though he saw the vision in which the pilot seals the foe to the 4th Titan, and he brings up this vision to ask how the pilot is standing in front of him. The pilot simply ignores the question and gives Sonic a trial just to see if he can prove himself worthy of fighting this foe. Of course, Sonic easily dislocates the jaw of this Frontier's hater, and receives the 4th and final blessing. The pilot calls Sonic the hero they were supposed to be, explaining in the process that his fights against the Titans freed the pilot's souls. So I guess it was a good thing that Sonic was so trigger happy? Sonic tells Sage that he feels like his old self again, and Sage explains that they still have to climb 1 more tower to forge the newfound energy into usable power. Meanwhile, Tails explains to the others that the Ancient's foe is corrupting everything on the island, including the Coco. Amy volunteers to help the Coco, collecting them and bringing them to the Elder Coco and Hermit Coco. Amy locates the next emerald, becoming inflicted with the same cyber corruption as Sonic in the process. Amy vows not to give up for the Coco's sake. We cut to Tails and Knuckles. Tails worries that he won't be able to prove himself, to which Knuckles responds that it's okay to ask for help, given that's exactly what Sonic did at the beginning of Final Horizon. Tails asks Knuckles to keep smashing the impact form so he can access cyberspace. As Knuckles collapses from the cyber corruption, he laughs the pain off and tells himself that if Sonic can handle it for 4 islands, he can handle it for 1. Tails again seeks out the Coco devices, feeling the effects of the corruption upon freeing the emeralds. Tails empathizes with Sonic, telling himself that he'll power through the pain too in order to keep pace with him. As the Ancient's foe lingers in the sky once again, Tails tells it off, standing up for Sonic and the others. Finally, Sonic and Sage climb the 5th tower and face the Master King Coco, leader of the Ancients. He beckons Sage to leave before allowing Sonic to enter his chamber. Sonic asks if Sage was right when she said Master King could transform his cyber corruption into new power, and he reluctantly confirms this to be the case. Sonic beefs with the guy who's supposed to help him save the world because he doesn't talk fast enough, and Master King decided to take his anger out on me specifically. Upon clearing the final trial, Sonic is granted new power. Master King warns him that using his full strength will cause this power to leave him, and entrusts him with the fate of the world. Though Final Horizon gets off to a slow start, and doesn't do a good job of explaining how the circumstances necessitate the new power that didn't exist in the base game, I was pleasantly surprised by how the story was handled. The base game had some cute moments between Sonic and Sage, I guess, but I much prefer having the ancient pilots serve as a foil to the main Sonic cast, and the additional screen time and agency granted to Sonic's friends through way of the cyber corruption. I just wish that Sage wasn't sidelined in the new story as a glorified tutorial, and that they gave Eggman literally anything to do outside of the optional side content. If I had to choose between this and the original ending, based solely on the story leading up to the final boss, I'd have to choose Final Horizon, include all of the other elements we've discussed so far, like combat and platforming, and I'd probably choose the original if I was on a new save file, but Final Horizon if I was on a completed save file. The main campaign is less frustrating, but Final Horizon is a far better sandbox. All that leaves is the final boss of both campaigns, which will hopefully pull my style versus substance argument altogether. Both versions of the game's final boss share the same Phase 1, but the cutscene leading into this fight differs depending on which campaign you're playing. In the base game, Sonic has found all but one emerald and tells himself he has to move faster. Luckily, Sage and Eggman arrive just in the nick of time to deliver the last emerald to him, but not before Eggman gets in one last jab. Sonic makes a sarcastic remark, then turns super and flies off. Eggman is annoyed, but Sage seems to be pleased at the results of their alliance. In Final Horizon, after Sonic speaks with Master King one last time, we cut to the fields near the pyramid. Sonic is running at full speed, and Sage appears next to him to confirm for herself that Sonic successfully obtained the new power. She reports that his friends aren't handling the cyber corruption very well, and when they all rendezvous, they're still able to stand and deliver the emeralds through the pain. Eggman again delivers the 7th and final emerald, and this time Sonic teases him for being too slow. The Ancient's foe is a far more menacing presence in this cutscene, groaning and growling in the Minecraft forest as it awakens. Sonic takes the emeralds and goes super, and this time, Eggman isn't just peeved, but actively upset due to Sage's admiration for Sonic. The supreme fight that follows both cutscenes may very well be the weakest boss in the entire game, mirroring Giganto in appearance, strategy, and difficulty. Supreme is little more than a punching bag for Sonic and his overpowered combat abilities, and the projectiles the Titan uses to shield itself don't add much depth to the battle. Just choose one cannon to target, parry the counterattack, and whittle away at the health bar. Rinse and repeat until Supreme knocks you back, triggering the QuickTime event that ends the fight. In the base game, the Ancient's foe escapes the Titan which held it hostage and retreats into space. Sage explains that Super Sonic won't be enough to defeat its true form, and tells Eggman that she has to pursue. Eggman, choking up at the thought of losing his daughter, tells Sage to leave and fulfill her function. She takes control of Supreme and, with Super Sonic at her side, takes off after the foe. At this point, a playthrough set on easy or normal difficulty would have the player complete a single QuickTime event to take down the literal personification of death, which makes the ending full of sacrifices and character resolutions feel totally unearned, yada yada. Look, I cleared 100% of base game Oranos Island, and like 99% of Final Horizons on hard mode for this review, so I'll spare you the rant about how fucking stupid it is that Sonic Team disabled the final boss for the recommended for those who want to focus more on the story mode, and instead subject you to my evil fucked up take that the main campaign's final boss is one of the best in series history. Look, you don't need me to tell you that from a gameplay perspective, this fight is disappointing. Rather than building up upon past mechanics and strategies and testing the skills the player has been building throughout the game, like a normal boss, the end instead adapts the mechanics of a different genre entirely, sidelining the gameplay for other elements. Let's not pretend this approach can't work though. The ending of Kirby Planet Robobot was just a Star Fox game, and it was the literal coolest thing ever. However, in this case, the lack of polish and fidelity indicates a compromise on the developer's part, not an artistic subversion of expectations. The end doesn't have the flair of Supersonic's moveset either, so the only thing to gain from this version of the final boss is some good old-fashioned Ian Flynn writing. Whether you agree with me on this take is going to depend entirely on whether you're a fan of Ian Flynn's works and Sonic Frontier's script, but the base game takes such a unique approach to the typical final boss that I can't help but tear up a little bit every time I reach the credits. As I briefly touched on when discussing the Ancients, their entire society is a cautionary tale for Sonic. Their society is built on technology on the scale of past supersonic level threats, technology that wields the limitless power of the Chaos Emeralds. One Titan, cut off from the power of the Emeralds, gives Supersonic a run for his money, but 4 Titans wielding the Emerald's full power couldn't scratch the end, and trapping it within cyberspace for eons has done nothing to dwindle its devastating might. This is a feeling that I believe Sonic Team would struggle to capture through gameplay, as Sonic's character is fundamentally a message towards his supporters, both fictional and real, to always push forward through insurmountable odds, and to always claim victory for the sake of those we love. There was never reason to doubt that he'd wipe the floor with the end, so rather than give Sonic an epic show of strength and a few snarky comebacks, the final boss is framed in such a way that your brain is put on autopilot as the bullets rain down, leaving just 2 points of focus: the end's cold, cruel voice, and the player's visceral response.
All the teeming chaos of creation, brought to order, to neutrality, to nothing.
The end views itself as an impartial arbiter of order, ravaging the universe to silence the uncertainty and unpredictability of life. In this way, the end isn't just a representation of death, but the natural opposite to Sonic, he who wields the chaos of creation to preserve life far and wide. However, the end's dialogue tells a different story, one of a self-righteous and narcissistic personality.
I saw your mind. Your courage never wavered. Why? Arrogance, ignorance, stupidity?
The end, knowing that it's far more capable than the supersonic level threats of past, makes the mistake of underestimating Sonic, assuming that he hasn't since grown strong enough to make a difference in this fight. But with Sonic too far away to speak up and project his unwavering hope onto the player, the end manages to reach a level of intimidation that stuck with me for years.
I was contained once. Is that why? My captors bent time and space. My captors built a whole reality to contain me. My captors burned their souls away to fuel their engines. And you?
Flawed as the end may be as an entity, it is still a force of nature. Just as Eggman has toiled away at his machines to rule over creation, losing progress to the forces of nature, the Ancients toiled away at their machines to protect it, losing their civilization to death. And those last 2 words, "and you?" Those 2 words send shivers down my spine every time I hear them. Sonic will probably say something along the lines of, "If you've been stopped once, then you can be stopped again." But without his spirit front and center, it creates a sense of doubt and hesitation as I feel compelled to answer in his place. How many times has my world felt like it was ending as I pushed back against a threat to my safety or well-being? How do I know that these threats have really been resolved and not just contained? Kept at bay for the time being, but waiting patiently to strike again. Will I spend a lifetime burning my soul away, buying time from these threats that will someday come back to consume me? After all,
the end comes for you all.
As someone who doesn't play a lot of bullet hell games or shoot 'em up games, I typically have to retry the end at least once before I roll credits, but the pattern is always the same, and the game grants more lives with each rematch. It may be completely unintentional, but I like to interpret this as a message that picking yourself back up after facing a struggle gets a little bit easier each and every time. After the end completes its monologue, The quick time event I mentioned before is triggered. Super Sonic and Sage block a blast from the end, and Sage uses Supreme to throw him in much the same way as Giganto threw Sonic. Super Sonic builds up speed to penetrate the end. Sage realizes that the end is about to explode, and uses Supreme to shield Earth from the blast, sacrificing herself and shifting fully to the side of good. Sonic is sent crashing down to Earth, left with Sage's last words. Now, let's rewind the clocks a bit. Sonic has decommissioned Supreme, but the end, freed from its shell, descends onto the planet and reanimates the Titan. In Final Horizon, the end only gets one line of dialogue, which somehow manages to miss the point of its character.
All shall perish. All shall return to order, to oblivion.
The end is a self-centered being, but not one that recognizes its own inherent evil. Changing nothingness to oblivion may seem like a minor nitpick, but it completely recontextualizes the end's whole ideology. It's no longer a being who believes its atrocities are a means to an end, but one who relishes the opportunity to create suffering. I can't say that I'm exactly wowed by this final boss. The gameplay is more involved and engaging, I guess, but it's not that much better than OG Supreme. The attack pattern is a bit more cryptic, but it didn't take me long to remember to target the wire first, then attack Supreme. The perfect parry felt good to perform and helped break up the monotony of regular combat, probably because the fight was designed around the mechanic from the very beginning. I kept knocking Supreme out with its wire detached, and wondering why the health bar still replenished, but then I remembered Super Sonic's quick Psyloop that I've only used in one battle thus far, and that triggered the second phase. With Supreme's gun wedged in the ground, performing one more Psyloop allows Eggman to take hold of it with his gun. Supreme launches a counterattack, but Sage is able to quickly put up a barrier. Sonic's friends fly now, and they help Sage hold the barrier together. Sonic Frontiers isn't exactly the pinnacle of polish, but this phase in particular was held together with duct tape and glue. I kept getting stuck in place for no goddamn reason, giving Supreme an opening to attack the barrier. After parrying a few projectiles and stunning Supreme numerous times, a quick time event was triggered seemingly at random, and clearing that allowed me to drop the health bar from 75% to 0. One more quick time event and I was in the clear. After Sonic knocks Supreme into the end, Eggman beckons him to enter the gun and prepares to open fire. Sonic breaks his promise of not going all out and summons a new form, which doesn't have a name. I'm gonna call it Super Pibby Glitch, to solo the end first try on hard mode. Both campaigns share similar endings. Sonic's friends are freed from cyberspace and reunite with him. In the base game, Sonic dismisses the super form, but in Final Horizon, he loses his power after overdoing it and crash lands. Eggman watches shooting stars rain down. In the base game, he's silent as he loses all hope of Sage ever returning. And in Final Horizon, he tells his dear daughter that they're heading home. So, what did I mean when I said style versus substance? Sonic Frontiers ends with Sage earning her redemption, though due to time restraints, this came at the cost of a satisfying final ordeal for Sonic, in which he masters the abilities given to him in this game. Final Horizon, which had the opportunity and resources to perfect this ending, instead chose to craft a replacement story. The main campaign's ending lacked the hype moments and aura of its earlier chapters, so it took the screen time dedicated to Sage's reconciled friendship with Sonic, and the additional time that could have been devoted to improving Eggman's character arc, and gave it all to side quests featuring Sonic's friends, and a main quest surrounding a power that wasn't necessary in the first draft. I enjoyed seeing the ways in which Amy, Tails, and Knuckles are inspired by Sonic to persevere through pain, but their character arcs aren't necessarily better for it. They have the same mid-credits scene with Sonic, in which they vow to share the love with the world, find their freedom, and reclaim their independence. Sage doesn't sacrifice herself in Final Horizon, and it may seem weird to be upset at this development, given Eggman recovers her files after the base game's credits roll, but for what reason then has she taken on her true good form in this scene? Hopefully you see now what I meant when I said at the beginning of the video that Final Horizons had no effect on the impact Sonic Frontiers left on the series. So after everything, which campaign would I choose? The original. Does that mean Final Horizon prioritizes style over substance, whereas the original third act doesn't? Well, I think so. But even if there was an objective answer, what would knowing it change? Is Sonic Frontiers, an already flawed game, worse because Sonic Team provided an alternative third act with somewhat frustrating gameplay and somewhat weaker characters? No, of course not. More content is more content. Having it is better than not having it. So why then did so many adjust their review scores to be much lower after the release of Final Horizon? Well, maybe it's not as deep as it seems at first glance. Maybe the release of new content over the span of a year was just as good an excuse as any to give Frontiers a critical second look. Sonic Frontiers is, in many ways, a game about freedom. In its story, freedom to express oneself, freedom to work through problems in a judgment-free zone, freedom to change others and to be changed by others. And in its gameplay, freedom to go where you want to go and do what you want to do. Freedom to adjust the intricacies of game design to create something that suits you. Freedom to pursue the things that make you happy. On one hand, it's frustrating that the gameplay loop of Frontiers enables players to take a style over substance approach, because both words have such a subjective meaning when applied to media critique. I find character-driven dialogue to be a form of substance, but one could argue that having characters stand around and say what they're thinking out loud is a pale imitation of the strong storytelling Sonic is known for. I find the combat to lack substance because Sonic Team uses it as a visual medium rather than an interactive one, but one could argue that the artistic talent behind animations and cutscenes is in itself a form of substance. No single review will give every aspect of Sonic Frontiers a fair and equal dissection, because the experience is driven by the player's personal tastes and preferences, not by the intentions of the developers. But, on the other hand, Sonic Frontiers used its unprecedented player choice to do the unthinkable. It got Japanese players back into the Sonic series. People who could take or leave Sonic's platforming, storytelling, and characters could suddenly latch onto elements taken from the open world and RPG genres, and that wouldn't have happened in a game where the player didn't have the choice to cherry pick the mechanics that they want to engage with. If Sonic Forces was a game that tried regurgitating old ideas and ended up saying nothing, then Sonic Frontiers was a game that tried every new idea it could come up with and ended up speaking to people. When I think of Sonic Frontiers, I think of the phrase style over substance, but is that strictly a bad thing? In my very first YouTube retrospective, I was the prime example of a game's stylistic charm allowing its deeper mechanics and lore to shine by drawing in those who otherwise wouldn't have paid mind to it. Frontiers had a similar effect on me, drawing me in with the glorious return of Super Sonic, and inviting me to explore not just the mechanics and lore of that game, but of the entire Sonic series through emulation and fan games. In this regard, the only difference between Persona 5 and Sonic Frontiers is that the developers of the latter never found the perfect balance between style and substance, instead leaving that decision to the player. At the end of the day, I love Sonic Frontiers for what it is. I love the character interactions despite the characterization inconsistencies and stiff animation. I love cyberspace despite the juxtaposition between its reused areas and unconventional controls. I love how flashy and fast-paced the combat feels, even if it is a crutch for lack of proper difficulty balancing. I love the feeling of running around the open zone and flinging the player characters around, so I'm willing to overlook the flawed art style and lack of fidelity. I hate having to make such critical, damning statements about Sonic Frontiers, like how the power struggle between style and substance detracts from the experience. But I only say these things because I know this new direction has a ton of talent and potential behind it, and I want it to have the highest possible chance of success going forward. And though passing the responsibility of game design and game balance onto its players may be an unsustainable blueprint for future entries, it managed to make this entry the ideal stepping stone for a budding Sonic fan.
And you?
They said we'd break. They said we'd lose. But here we are. What else is
I must say, you've disappointed me. After all that time, you're too scathing to appeal to the fans, and too forgiving to interest the critics. May the fandom have mercy on your soul, because you'll find that I'm even less forgiving.